Good morning, everybody. It's Vicky Lee here. Welcome to this session around Microsoft Education licensing. So we do have an hour and a half, I think, scheduled for our training today. So we have got a range of things to go through. But before I actually dive into the training, just to do a little bit of general sort of logistics. The session is being recorded, so if you do have an urge to watch back the training after it has happened, the link that you used to join the session today can be used to access the recording. And if you do have any questions for me as we go through the training today, please do feel free to pop them into the Q&A window. I'll keep an eye on that and I'll answer questions at appropriate points during the training. So the aim today is to go through and obviously just give you an overview really of Microsoft Education licensing. So I am going to start from the beginning. What I'm planning on having a look at are the different education offerings that are available. So we're really focusing here on online services and what different online services licenses we have specifically for our academic customers. Once we've done that, we'll then have a look at the Enrolment for Education Solutions, or EES. This was updated just about a year ago, actually, November 2018. It sort of had a bit of an update on how it works. So we will go through and obviously make sure that you're happy with how that agreement works. Tying in with that, we've got the student use benefit. So we obviously need to talk about how that works and what licenses are available through the student use benefit. And once we've done that, we'll then move on to looking at purchasing academic licenses through CSP, our cloud solution provider program. So again, we'll have a look at the offerings that are available through CSP, how it works, the student use benefit again with CSP as well. So really, do the same for CSP as we've done for EES. And then we will wrap up the session just with a bit of licensing guidance. So a few scenarios to help identify which agreement could be the best agreement for academic customers to buy through, and a rather nice flowchart that again helps you identify the different agreements. So a range of different topics to talk about, but as I say, please do as we go through ask if you have got any questions. But let's start off before we dive into EES with more just the general sort of education offerings, and let's think about all the different agreements that customers can buy through, because as you've seen from my agenda, I am going to focus on EES and CSP today. But actually, when we think about agreements, we do have a whole range of different agreements. And if we start off thinking about just our commercial agreements, so I'll show you the academic equivalents in a moment. But at the minute, we do have a range of different agreements that our customers can buy through. And when we look at how customers can buy licenses, we always want to give them sort of three main routes through which they can buy. So we want them to be able to buy potentially from Microsoft. And if we look at this slide with our commercial agreements, we'd really be looking at the blue boxes. We want customers to be able to buy from partners with what we're calling a sort of the partner-led experience, which is really cloud solution provider program. And we also want customers to be able to buy direct from Microsoft's websites, which on this particular slide is that pale pink box with the sort of online subscription agreement associated with it. And for our commercial customers, they can choose, do they want to buy from Microsoft, from a partner, or web direct? And if they want to buy from Microsoft, we have a range of different agreements that they can currently choose from. We have committed agreements where we standardize on certain software. We have our transactional agreements, which are the agreements where customers can buy whatever licenses they want in any quantity. And we have agreements aimed for smaller organizations and larger organizations. And nowadays with our agreements, most of them have on-premises licenses and online services available across the agreements, but the availability of licenses will vary across the agreements. Now, if we were to apply this to the academic world, we'll see that the setup is actually very similar. We have agreements where the academic customer is in contract with Microsoft, so they are buying from Microsoft, again, still the blue boxes. We absolutely have the academic customers being able to buy from a partner with this partner-led experience of CSP, or having the ability to buy online. And again, when we look at the blue boxes where there's a range of agreements that we can choose between, we have our committed agreements over on the right-hand side in the form of things like the school enrolment, OVSES, and the enrolment for education solutions. And as I said, EES is obviously one of our focus points for today. So we do have the committed options, but again, we still have our transactional purchasing, like things like Academic Open, academic customers being able to buy through MPSA, and so on. So there is obviously a range of different options there. But today we're focusing on the cloud solution provider and the enrolment for education solutions. And if we have got academic customers that want to buy through these particular agreements, they do need to be an eligible customer. So it's always very important that customers do meet the academic eligibility. And we do have a document that does detail it. You can see a screenshot here, the qualified educational user definition. This document is a localized document, so if you were going to have a look at it to read about the academic eligibility, please do make sure that you're obviously looking in the correct region. So we have the EMEA document as a screenshot on this slide. But it actually goes through and does clarify that, you know, educational institutes, the public libraries and museums, the administrative offices, boards of education, you know, these are the types of organisations that are obviously typically allowed to buy through the academic agreements. So it's very important when we look at these agreements that you know, our customers are obviously you know, eligible to buy through these agreements. If they're not allowed to purchase through them. So that document can be found online, and actually the site I go to is microsoftvolumelicensing.com, and on there you would be able to download that document and check it out if you haven't already done so. So for our eligible customers, they have the academic agreements that they can buy through. And when we think about what they're licensing, nowadays what we're really thinking about for our academic customers is licensing online services. And you can imagine here that we were thinking around Microsoft 365. And when we look at Microsoft 365, we do have a range of different options available for Microsoft 365. We have the enterprise option, which commercial customers would be using and can target any size of customer. We have a business option, again, for small commercial businesses, and we do have our education offerings. And when we look at Microsoft 365, it's a suite that always consists of three main things. It will always have some Office 365, some Windows 10, and some security and management tools. And then potentially there's specialist licenses on top of it. So when we think about the enterprise offering, we're thinking about the E offerings, E3 and E5 of Microsoft 365. And you can see here that that consists of the E3 and E5 plans of Office 365, Windows 10 and EMS. With the business offering that's aimed at the small to medium sized business, we're working with Office 365, you know, Business Premium, Windows 10 Pro, and some of the security and management features from EMS and Windows 10. It's the education column, though, that we care about today, and we're talking about the A options here. So there is a Microsoft 365 A3 and A5, and that consists of, you know, Office 365 A3 or A5, Windows 10 Education E3 or E5, and EMS E3 or E5. So we're getting the same security and management features that, you know, obviously commercial customers would be working with, because we need to secure and manage our environments. But as I say, they consisted part of Microsoft 365 A3 and A5. And then we do have a specialist license in the academic world in the form of the Minecraft Education Edition. So that's also part of Microsoft 365 A3 and A5. So we're going to see when our customers are licensing through the Enrolment for Education solutions, we are going to see, you know, amongst the offerings that they can choose, obviously Microsoft 365 A3 and A5. And if we look at that, and again, just broken it down, we can see the components that I've just talked about. It's worth noting that obviously the Microsoft 365 education suites are the main suites that our customers are going to be licensing with. They could license with the whole suite, or they could license the individual components as well if we want to. So yeah, absolutely, they could just license Office 365 if they needed to, or EMS if they needed to. But there is also an Office 365 A1 option, and Office 365 A1 is a free offering. So as we look through the different purchase options, we're going to look at which types of users are likely to be working with the free Office 365 A1 and which users you'll obviously be licensing for the paid for Microsoft 365 A3 or A5. And when we think about Office 365 A1, that's really giving browser-based access into the Office applications, and you're obviously getting access to things like Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and so on. You can imagine as we move into Microsoft 365 A3 or A5, we're getting access in the Office 365 to Office 365 Pro Plus. So we've actually got the full Office suite, and then we've got more of the user productivity tools along with Windows and the security and management tools and so on. We are eligible as well with Microsoft 365 for the student use benefit, so I will come back to that and I will go into proper detail around how the student use benefit works, but just know that those Microsoft 365 A3 or A5 licenses are eligible for that benefit too. Now, when we work with our education licensing, we'll have a look and we'll see that our customers are going to choose what do they want to be licensed with. Do they want to license for an individual component such as Office 365? Do they want the full suite such as Microsoft 365? And do they want the A3 or the A5 flavors? And that's obviously a decision that the customers are going to have to make. So it's worth just remembering that when we think about just generally with Microsoft 365, the difference between an A3 and an A5, we know that A5 adds value across 4 key areas. It gives us extra security features. It gives us extra compliance features. It brings in the meetings and the calling features. So that's sort of the voice element of Skype for Business Online / Teams. It brings in analytics features like Power BI Pro coming into play. So when customers are having a look and saying, okay, do I license with an A3 or do I license with an A5? They obviously need to have a look at these extra features. And I just want to remind you that from a licensing perspective, all the extra A5 features are available as individual add-ons. So when you are looking at what an academic customer might license, if they're not sure, do they want to go A3 or A5, they could start with the A3 offerings, and they could then, if they wanted just some of the extra A5 features, they could purchase individual add-ons just to top up A3 with the extra bits that they want. So the individual licenses can be purchased, but we also do have a couple of sort of suites. So there is a security add-on that would add on to Microsoft 365 A3, and the security add-on would just bring in all the extra security features. So it's more cost effective, as you might imagine, to buy the security add-on than it would be to license the individual security features. So if a customer is particularly keen on just, I want A3, but I want all the extra security bits, then they could buy that add-on. The same with the compliance. There's a couple of compliance add-ons, but if a customer does have Microsoft 365 A3, they can buy the A5 compliance add-on, and again that would just allow them to purchase at a better price those extra compliance features. And then we have the meetings and the calling and the analytics features, again just as normal sort of standalone add-ons. So when you're looking at your academic customers, they might start with a Microsoft 365 A3, they might just dive in with Microsoft 365 A5, but know that they can start with A3 and they can add on individual bits if they want to. Also, we do have various step-up licenses available in the academic world. And with a step-up license, if you think about how the licensing works in something like EES, the customer's going to pay at the beginning of the year for that year's worth of licenses. So if they've paid for an A3 option and they want to go up to an A5, if they buy a step up, they can just pay the difference in cost between the A3 and the A5 to go up to that higher level of license. And there are a range of different step-up licenses, which nicely mean that customers can sort of change their mind as to what they want to be licensed with as they go along. So for instance, if someone had just started with Office 365 Pro Plus, literally the Office suite, and then decide, actually, do you know what, I'd like Office 365 A5, there's a step-up license available. They pay the difference in cost between the two, they'd be licensed for Office 365 A5. The same if they started with Office 365 A3 and they decide they want to move up to A5. There's a step up that would allow them to do that. Alternatively, what about they want to end up on Microsoft 365 A5, but maybe they started with Office 365 A3? Well, you can see the step up route there. They'd step up to either Office 365 A5 or Microsoft 365 A3. And then they'd be able to buy another step up to go up to Microsoft 365 A5. And the same you can see here, that you can step up from Office 365 A5, obviously Microsoft 365 A3, you can step up from them up to Microsoft 365 A5. So I just wanted you to be aware that these licenses do exist in the academic world, so that customers can start at a lower level of license, knowing that if they want to go up to a higher one, they have got the ability to do that at any point that they want in the sort of life cycle of their agreement. So I'm not really going to talk about step-ups anymore. It's just know that those licenses obviously do exist, and it will be things like the Enrolment for Education Solutions where we would need to be working potentially with those licenses. But as I say, my real focus today is going to be around EES and CSP. We do have a range of different offerings available. And this chart just shows the offerings across the different agreements. So you can see what licenses are available in EES. So that's everything apart from a license called Microsoft 365 A1, which I will come to later in this session and talk about that. If we look at the CSP column, we can see everything apart from the Office 365 Pro Plus device-based subscription. Now, that's also a license that I'm going to talk about as we carry on with today's session. So EES and CSP do have most of the academic online services licenses available through those agreements. You will find if you have got customers buying through OVS ES, that obviously availability isn't as great through that agreement as it is with the other ones. And again, WebDirect doesn't have absolutely everything available if a customer does want to buy from those websites. But it is EES and CSP that I'm focusing on, but I do quite like this little table just for that clarification of what licenses agree where exist and where do they exist. Do remember though that the usage rights that you'll get for software do potentially vary across the agreements. So actually we are going to look at some of the rules with EES and CSP, where we'll see the things that you can do with your licenses do vary slightly across those two agreements. So I will highlight that when appropriate. The last bit just to touch on, but I'm going to talk about in proper detail as we carry on, but just in this introduction bit, is the student use benefit. The student use benefit is a benefit that we'll see when customers license all of their sort of faculty and staff. I'll come back to that sort of definition as we're talking about. If they license all of them with certain qualifying software, they are eligible for student use benefit licenses on a 1:15 or a 1:40 ratio. These are free licenses that can be assigned out to our students, and we'll see will be available through EES, OVS ES and CSP. So when we're looking at our licensing, as I say, we're going to think as we go through the agreements, how are we licensing faculty and staff? On what basis are we buying their licenses? And then if we've licensed all of them, we've got this enterprise-wide coverage, we are going to have access to the student use benefit. Okay, so that's really my sort of just introduction on the education offerings. Let me just check if there's any questions. Okay, sorry, just reading a question from Alex. Alex, I will have to follow up on that one, as I say, with regards to where announcements are. I mean, as you say, the docs.microsoft.com site, sorry, I haven't read Alex's whole question out, but it's just with regard to where announcements about licensing is placed. That docs.microsoft.com site is a good place for looking for the announcements, that side of things. But let me follow up on that question afterwards, if that's all right, Alex. Right, so let's dive into EES, the Enrolment for Education Solutions. Now, the Enrolment for Education Solutions is an agreement that has been around now for a number of years. I've said to you that it had an update in 2018, so November 2018, which it did, but it did actually have an update in 2017 as well. And the 2017 update did change how the Enrolment for Education Solutions worked compared to the previous enrolment, which was the 2015 enrolment. And then, as I say, the 2017 one got tweaked slightly up to the 2018. So what I want to do is I'm going to go through on this slide. I'm going to focus obviously on how the enrolment works now, but this slide will do a little bit of a comparison between the old 2015 enrolment and the new 2018 one. With the Enrolment for Education Solutions, though, it is a committed agreement. So we are licensing our academic institute, but we are making a commitment to license sort of enterprise-wide. So what you'll find is that when we license with the Enrolment for Education Solutions, we license now against something called an education qualified user. It used to be a full-time equivalent, an FTE, but now, as I say, we're going to count education qualified users. Now, I'm going to come to the definition of what makes an EQU so that you're happy with that, but we are going to have to count them all up. We do have a minimum entry level for this particular agreement, which is 1,000 EQUs. So we are looking at institutes here that have 1,000 or more education qualified users. If they don't have that, they're not obviously eligible for this particular agreement. Now, this is an agreement that in the past used to be that you would have counted your FTEs and you would have licensed them with your chosen on-premises software. So that might have been Office, it might have been Windows, it might have been a Cal Suite, or obviously all of those if you wanted them. Nowadays in the academic world, we license with online services, so what we call our education platform products, but as I say, they are online services. So Microsoft 365 and those components is what we're looking at here. So we're going to count our education qualified users, have at least 1,000 of them, and then we are going to license them with online services. But I will come back and talk about the rights that we have back to our on-premises environments, because much as we're having to license in the cloud, obviously we do appreciate that not all academic institutes are running in the cloud yet. They might have on-prem technology. So we'll look at those dual use rights that we'll get. The term for EES has always been a 1-year term or a 3-year term. So again, our customers can choose, do they want to work on an annual basis or are they happy to have a 3-year term? And they will pay annually for those licenses, whether it's a 1 or a 3-year agreement, it is always annual payment. You can change the number of education qualified users. So as you can imagine, and if an institute needs to increase that number during the year, they absolutely can do. If they need to decrease the count, they can do. And decreasing the count is something that you could do on anniversary. And you are nowadays allowed to decrease the count if you need to, down to the programme minimum. So down to that minimum entry level of 1,000 EQUs. You can't go below that. And then again, when we think about EES, it has had associated with it a benefit called the lab and library benefit. So in the past, it was if I had licensed all of my FTEs with Office or maybe with Windows, I would be allowed to put an on-premises copy of Office or Windows on all of my institute-owned or leased devices in classrooms or open access labs. So those shared devices, you have a room just full of computers, you could, with the lab and library benefit, put Office or Windows on them. Now, what's happened now is the EES has had a similar benefit, so has had the lab and library benefit, but it's been updated because the lab and library benefit with Office was on-premises Office, Office Professional Plus. And actually, we've had a recent update to allow Office 365 Pro Plus to be used on a device-based subscription. So we have a sort of an updated now, should I say, lab and library benefit with this device-based subscription license to Office 365 Pro Plus. So I have got some slides on that, so I will come back to that benefit and we'll look at obviously that in proper detail. But what I want to do is pick out some of the key things here. So the first thing is that we're going to have to count our education qualified users, or our EQUs. So with the Enrolment for Education Solutions, an education qualified user, we can see here is any employee or contractor. It excludes students who access or use an education platform product for the benefit of the institution. So we would look at those sort of users, anyone who falls underneath that definition, so the employees or the contractors, we are going to license with an education platform product. And again, I'll confirm what products actually are eligible for that. So the institute is going to have to look, and they're going to have to work out who's an EQU, count them up, and we know they must have at least 1,000 of them. Now, they're going to have staff within their organisation that aren't EQUs. They're not using an education platform product for the benefit of the institution. So what are we going to license those people with? And those are the people that we license with the free Office 365 A1. So I don't know, it could be catering staff, caretakers, people like that who need a computer every now and again. They need to check their emails and so on, but they're not having to use an education platform product. Those people, we could go ahead and say, actually, you can be licensed with the free Office 365 A1. So very important to look at the technology that a user needs to work with, because as I say, if they need to use an education platform product, they will be an education qualified user. So obviously we need to clarify, who those users really are and what products we're going to license them with. So we have a little scenario here with the Graphic Design Institute, where they're looking across their organisation. They have 2,000 full-time faculty, 600 part-time faculty. They all do the same tasks, they work different hours. We don't really care about that with this counting. We don't mind if they're full-time or part-time. They also have 1,000 full-time staff, 400 part-time staff, and of that 1,400, 300 of them only access email or basic documents on the web. Maybe using phones, maybe personally owned devices, maybe accessing a shared device on occasional basis within the institute. When we look at that definition and we sit there and think, okay, got 4,000 employees in total, how many of them are EQUs? We would look at it and hopefully you're sitting there thinking, well, the 300 who are only accessing email and basic documents on the web, those people are the light users. They're the people we're going to license with the free Office 365 A1. The other 3,700 of them would class as an education qualified user. And I do want to highlight that this is different from the count with the old 2015 enrolment, when we would have been counting on FTEs. There were different ways of doing this dependent upon where you were based geographically. So actually in the UK, we were counting anyone who worked for over 200 hours per year as an FTE. In America, for instance, we would have had a different calculation. But the counts for EQUs obviously can be different nowadays to how they would have been in the past. But when it comes to licensing our EQUs, we are going to choose which education platform products we want to license them with. So it could be that we are licensing them with Microsoft 365 A3 or A5. So they want that whole Microsoft 365 suite, and obviously we've chosen, do we want A3, do we want A5? Or actually we would be allowed to combine the two together. Alternatively, we might choose to license with individual elements. So they might just want Office 365, we might just want EMS, or we might just want Windows 10. They might not want the full Microsoft 365. So we can absolutely dive in and license the individual elements, or we can just license with Office 365 Pro Plus as well, if required. So for our education qualified users, we will look at them all and say, OK, what do they need? And we might license them all with Office 365 Pro Plus, or we might license them all with Microsoft 365, but we could have a combination of E3 and E5 to hit our sort of total count. But we do need to identify which element or elements we want to license the EQUs with. And as I said, the other users that aren't an education qualified user, I've already mentioned, we would license them with the free Office 365 A1. And, you would quite happily then go through, and we come back to the Graphic Design Institute, their licensing with their sort of 2018 enrolment for EES. They've chosen, Microsoft 365 A3 for all of their EQUs, Office 365 A1 for those other users, at an annual price of $69 US per year. Obviously, we could work out the cost if I had my calculator. I can't do that maths in my head. I could obviously work out the overall cost of that license. So with our education qualified users and those education platform products, we are nowadays, as I have kind of alluded to on the previous slide, allowed to mix certain of the education platform products. So when you're licensing with Microsoft 365, it is possible to have a combination of A3 and A5. So if you need some of the users to be licensed with A3 and some to be licensed with A5, you can happily have that mix. Or the same if you were just licensing with EMS, you could have a mix of E3 and E5. You can see Office 365, again, I can have a mix of A3 and A5 if I want to. So each row on that table, you're allowed to mix within that row. So if I've chosen that element, I can have an E3 or an E5, A3 or A5 within that row. I'm not allowed to mix across the rows, so I couldn't license half with Microsoft 365 and the other half with Office 365. That wouldn't be allowed. The suite, the product I've chosen is for everyone. As I say, it's just the plans that I am allowed to mix. So that was a sort of change that came in last year again with EES, allowing you to do that level of mixing, because not everyone needs to work with exactly the same level of online service. Okay. All right, I'm just having a quick look at the questions. Right, Chris, I think I'm about to answer your question. And Alex, again, thank you. An extra comment on your previous one, as I say, we'll follow up with that afterwards for you. So Chris has asked a question. about, okay, I'm licensing online services because that's what we're having to license inside of EES. What about my on-premises licenses? How am I going to do this? So there's various ways. One way to know, actually, and I'll just get this one out of the way, is that the on-premises products are still available through EES, but as an additional product. So you make your commitment, that enterprise-wide commitment across your education qualified users, you make that commitment with your online services, but you do then have, as I say, the rights to buy on-prem software as an additional product. So I don't know if I wanted an on-premises copy of SQL, for instance, I would be able to do that. However, what you do get with EES when you license your online services are some special use rights. So I've licensed my EQUs with Microsoft 365, A3 or A5, I don't mind which one that I've gone for, but I've licensed them with online services. These licenses, Microsoft 365, A3 and A5, are the successors to the old education desktop, the on-premises licensing that was Windows, Office and a Cal suite. And because they're successors, they are equivalent to and enhanced. So what we really mean by this is that the customers will still have all the equivalent on-premises rights that they did have before through the education desktop, and they get the extra online services. So what we get is, even though we've licensed with Microsoft 365, A3 or A5, we still get the rights, if we want to install a copy of on-premises Office on a single device per licensed user that can be downgraded to an earlier version if needs be. So if they're not ready yet to be on Office 365 Pro Plus, they could do that. The same with Windows. There is the rights to downgrade to an earlier version of Windows, so such as 8.1. I mean, you don't really want to go too far nowadays, do you? Because obviously we're about to hit end of support for Windows 7. Yeah, 8 won't be that far behind. I shouldn't think, you know, ideally we'd stay on Windows 10. But we do have those on-prem rights. We also have rights equivalent to the Enterprise Cal suite. So when I've licensed with Microsoft 365, A3 or A5, those licenses effectively include the client access licenses back to the on-prem servers. So I have the rights to access on-premises Exchange, SharePoint, Skype for Business servers. I have the rights to access my on-premises Windows server, on-premises System Center. You know, all of those rights that the Enterprise Cal suite would have given me, I have within my Microsoft 365 A3 or A5 license. So again, if I haven't taken the productivity servers up to the cloud yet, I'm still running them on-prem. Even though I'm licensed in the cloud, I can access those on-prem servers. And in EES, I also get server installation rights. So again, when I've licensed with Microsoft 365, A3 or A5, I am allowed to install on premises an unlimited number of extra Exchange, SharePoint and Skype for Business servers, obviously dedicated for my use as a customer. So I can install that on my on-premises infrastructure. And again, because I've got effectively the client access license rights to access those servers, that's great, I can access them as well. So what we try to do is, even though there's that move in that you have to license in the cloud, our EQUs that we've covered with Microsoft 365, A3 or A5 will still be able to access all those on-prem environments. And then any extra on-premises licenses you need, any extra Windows Server licenses, SQL licenses, whatever they might be, you can buy as an additional product through that agreement. So, Chris, hopefully that answers your question. Obviously, please do shout if it doesn't. So I've tried to pick out, as we've gone through the training, just a handful of useful questions and answers. So one, just to clarify something I have already sort of said, but are we allowed to have a mix in our education qualified users between an A3 and an A5, for instance, with that Microsoft 365 or Office 365? And the answer is yes, you can. In the 2018 sort of update, that was brought in programmatically to the agreement. If you'd like to read the things that say this is allowed, because quite frankly, I do. I like to see things in writing. It does tell you inside of the product terms document. So that is the place that details the fact that you are allowed to do a mix and match. The other important one, though, is does the free Office 365 A1 license give access to on-premises servers? So my previous slide, I was showing you that if I had a Microsoft 365 A3 or A5 license, I had on-prem rights and the rights to install extra Exchange servers and so on. Do I get any rights like that with the free Office 365 A1? And the answer there is no, you don't. So really important to appreciate that not every license has those on-premises rights associated with them. And actually, I will show you a place later where you can look up what on-prem rights different licenses do have, because again, it's really nice to see it and know for sure whether something has a right or not. Okay, so we've counted our EQUs, we've chosen to license them with obviously an online service, so that's obviously all looking good. We do then get some extra rights. I want to come back to that concept of the lab and library benefit. So I was talking about the fact that when you cover your EQUs with a Windows license, so that could be as part of Microsoft 365, or it could be they've got a Windows 10, E3 or E5 education license. When I've licensed all of my EQUs with Windows, I'm allowed to install Windows on my lab and library devices, so all of those shared devices within my institute. Well, there is an extra benefit which works very much like the lab and library benefit, but it's a shared Windows device right, saying that again, when you've licensed all of your EQUs with Windows 10, and I don't really mind how I've got Windows 10, but I've bought Windows 10, that Windows may be installed on shared devices. So things like kiosks, lecture hall computers, devices like that, that are then allowed to be used by the infrequent users. So the janitors, the cafe workers, those ones that you've probably licensed with Office 365 A1, they've got the rights to access their email and maybe look at documents and a bit of light editing with documents. But the machines that they're working with obviously need Windows on them. So those devices, the shared Windows device will say, yes, you're allowed to put Windows on there, as long as those devices aren't someone's primary work device. So a primary work device is a device that someone uses for work for more than 50% of the time. As long as it's not someone's primary work device, you're allowed to cover that with Windows with this shared Windows devices right. So it's very specifically, as I say, these shared devices we're talking about. So it's an approach that's very similar to the lab and library benefit, and again came into play last November. Well, as in 2018, oh, excuse me, and the terms are detailed inside of the product terms document. So I just took this snippet out of the product terms bit, and it tells me that, you know, if I've assigned Windows to all of my education qualified users, you know, I can install it on any shared device and so on. So what I've basically just gone through. But again, the product terms document is where that particular benefit is detailed. So I've had that right for a while now, that I can put Windows on those devices without having to license that separately. I just have to have licensed my EQUs for Windows, and those devices are covered. But we also have this update now with a device-based subscription for Office 365 Pro Plus. So previously, the lab and library benefit for Office was that I had licensed all of my EQUs with Office 365 Pro Plus, either as that license either as part of Office 365, either as part of Microsoft 365. I was then allowed to install an on-premises copy of Office Professional Plus on all my lab and library devices for my students to work with. Now, what you've got then is a different experience because your users, your students on their own devices are probably using Office 365 Pro Plus, everything in the cloud, working with that cloud license. Then they come to lab and library devices. They're working with an on-premises device, so the experience is a bit different for them. But also for IT, they've got that different deployment experience because they're putting a on-prem license onto a computer rather than online service. So what we wanted to do was simplify things and say, actually, you can use Office 365 Pro Plus across all of your devices. But this is traditionally a user-based license, a user subscription license. You're licensing a user for Office, not a device. So how do you cope with that on shared devices, those lab and library devices? So what's happened is we've got a special device-based subscription license only available through the Enrolment for Education Solutions currently for Office 365 Pro Plus, meaning that you can use this license on your lab and library devices, which should make it much easier, obviously, to set up those devices because you're just using Office 365 Pro Plus, but with a device license, as I say, specifically for that device. And this is replacing the lab and library benefit for Office. So the aim will be, obviously, all of our EES customers will eventually move over to this particular license. It's a free of charge license, so just be aware of that. Again, like the lab and library benefit, there's no cost associated with it. But it should simplify the sort of experience because with user-based licenses, we know that the license is associated with a user. That user has to have effectively activated, they're using Azure Active Directory ID to log on with and make sure that that license is an active license. With a device-based license, you don't have to worry about the user level activation. But the experience is the same for the users. They're using the same client-based software because it's Office 365 Pro Plus with the same feature set in it, because we know it has more features than the on-premises Office. So they've got their usual feature set that they're working with, even though they're sat on this shared device-based license. However, if they do want to access online services, so they do want to access, OneDrive, Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, that side of things, those students do still need their user-based license for that. Now, we'll come to that because that'll be student use benefit that will give them that. But they do still need to have a user license. So you'll have your students covered with a user license, but the shared devices have that device-based license. So there are some rules for eligibility, and if you look to the right-hand side of my slide, it does clarify here that the device-based subscription, available as a benefit for every customer who covers their education qualified users with some form of Office 365 Pro Plus license, that you can have as many device-based subscription licenses as the total number of Office 365 Pro Plus licenses that you have in that institute. And that is including student licenses as well as faculty licenses. And again, clarifying that it's only available through the Enrolment for Education Solutions. And then a bit of technical stuff about the versions of Windows you need to be working with. How does it work? Well, it's ordered as a $0 SKU. So as you can see here, the reseller would place an order for that $0 SKU for the device-based licenses for obviously the desired quantity, knowing how many we're eligible for, how many does that academic institute actually need, and then they will be able to install those obviously licenses and the software onto those lab and library devices. Down at the bottom left, it does clarify that this is for the Enrolment for Education Solutions. It is replacing the historic lab and library benefit, but a customer won't be forced to move over to it straight away. So if you've got an existing EES customer who at the moment is using the lab and library benefit with the on-premises office, and actually they don't want to move yet to the device-based subscription for Office 365 Pro Plus, that's fine. For the term of their existing EES, they'll be able to carry on with the existing lab and library benefit if they prefer. But obviously, ultimately, this is replacing it. So ultimately, they will end up with their device-based licenses. There is also an FAQ on this. Now, I wasn't planning on reading through the whole FAQ. It's probably something that's worth you consuming yourself. But I put it on here because I wanted to really highlight that there is some information about this. There was announcements about this, and bottom left-hand corner, there's a URL. So you might want to make a quick note of this, or if you access the recording, obviously it'll be in there, to the announcement. So that talks about the license, but it also has links in it to the documentation. And inside of the documentation is this FAQ. And as you can imagine, that will be updated if any extra questions come into play. So it's worth having a look at that FAQ just to see all of the fine detail, but that content is all available online. Right, let me just have a quick look at the questions. So Alex, just to confirm, everything I'm talking about is EES, not OVSES. So yes, I'm doing EES and CSP today as our two main licensing options. And Chris, yes, happy for you to send a scenario through after the training if you've got sort of a specific thing that you've got questions on. That's fine. OK, let's carry on then and think about student licensing now. So we're still in EES. But we just want to take a look at how we're going to license our students. So I've told you that if you've got an enrolment for education solutions, that you would have counted your education qualified users and you would have chosen which education platform product to license them with. And that the users who aren't education qualified users, you license with the free Office 365 A1 product. So that's fine. What about our students, though? We want to make sure that our students have access to all of the software that they need. And there's two ways of licensing students within EES. You can purchase what we call the student option. And with the student option, we'll see that you're going to count up your students and then license them with the education platform products. But these are paid for licenses. You get then obviously your chosen platform product, you pay for it as a student price, but you get the full rights of that software because it's a paid for license. You can do everything that that piece of software really allows you to do. Alternatively, you can go for the free student use benefit. And for the student use benefit, this is a benefit you get if you license all of your education qualified users with an education platform product. That product that you've licensed your EQUs for will then be available as a free student use benefit license. However, you will find it's a restricted use rights license, so you can't necessarily do everything with it. So let's look in a bit more detail. First of all, the student option, the paid for option, as I say, is a case of you could count up all your full and part-time students. You have to have at least 1,000 of them, and you can license them with an education platform product. But as I said, it is a paid for license, this one, much as there is special student pricing. It is a paid for license, but you get the full rights to the software. So if your students didn't need to be licensed with the software with full usage rights, you might go for the student option. Alternatively, and probably more commonly used, is the student use benefit, where if I bring this slide up, which we've seen before, we're licensing all of our faculty and staff, so all of our, in the EES anyway, our education qualified users, we're licensing them all with an eligible product. They will then have access to the student use benefit licenses on either a 1:15 or a 1:40 ratio. So what we're saying here is for every one license you've bought for your education qualified user, you either have 15 student use benefit licenses or 40 student use benefit licenses available. And I'll show you in a moment how we see that ratio. They're ordered as $0 SKUs. You have got to order these licenses, these $0 SKUs. It was the same with the device-based license actually for Office 365 Pro Plus. We have to transact them because with online services, you have to have a license available to be able to assign, in this case to a user or previously to a device. You have to have the license available to assign, yet they're free of charge licenses. So the $0 SKU is really there just for you to say, look, I need, I don't know, 2,000 student use benefit licenses for this particular institute to be available. You just transact the $0 SKU to do that. And student use benefit licenses are actually available through EES, OVSES and CSP. And with all of them, they all work in the same way, actually. You have to have covered all of your faculty and staff. So with EES, that's your education qualified users. With OVSES, it would be your FTEs you are covering. CSP, you're covering all your faculty and staff. You do have to have an enterprise-wide commitment to be eligible for the student use benefit. Now, if you're wondering, okay, what licenses are eligible for the student use benefit? What can the student use? Because as I said, with the benefit, it's not an equivalent license to the full license. It is a special student use benefit license. So what do I have access to? What agreements are they available through? What's my ratio? Is it a 1 to 15 or a 1 to 40? This table comes out of the product terms document. So Appendix H in the product terms document has the student use benefit table in there. So for instance, I can see here that if I have license with Microsoft 365 Education A3, I've got the student use benefit, which gives me all of that stuff, those licenses. It's available through EES and CSP, and it's a 1 to 40 ratio. So for every one EQU I have licensed with Microsoft 365 A3, I have up to 40 student use benefit licenses available. So if you ever want to check your student use benefit rights and quantities, please do come and look inside of product terms. That is the place to actually look. And if we just did a little scenario, Graphic Design Institute, do you remember they had 3,700 education qualified users? They licensed them with Microsoft 365 A3. So that means that they have on a 1 to 40 ratio up to 148,000 Microsoft 365 A3 student use benefit licenses that they could order, and they could obviously allocate out to their students. Hopefully that's enough. You never know. So, will customers that don't have EES get the same student use benefits? So in CSP, for instance, in OVSES, maybe I'm in an older version of EES. Yes, is the answer. Those student use benefit rights as displayed in that table, it doesn't matter, if it says they're available in a particular agreement, I don't care what version of that agreement, whether it's an older one or a newer one. What if my ratio of 1 to 15 or 1 to 40 isn't enough? So I've licensed all of my faculty and staff, my EQUs. I don't get enough student use benefit licenses. What do I do at that point? Well, I buy extra licenses for my EQUs. Yeah, I could top up those full licenses, buy some more of them, and that would give me extra student use benefit rights. So I can obviously buy more to get more licenses if I need to. And do the student use benefit licenses include the client access license rights? So do I have the on-premises rights back onto my on-premises servers? And here, importantly, the answer is no. When we're licensing with the free student use benefit, that is for online services only. We don't have the on-prem rights. So this is why I was trying to really highlight, hopefully I managed, that the paid for licenses for students have the full rights. So that would have on-premises rights. The free student use benefit licenses do not have full rights. So for instance, they don't have the on-premises rights, the dual access rights. So really do appreciate that it's different. And it will tell you in the product terms document when you're looking at, what can I do? If it doesn't apply to the student use benefit, it will say this benefit does not apply to licenses, purchased through the student use benefit, or words to that effect. But it's very clear in the product terms when something isn't available in student use benefit. Now, I pointed out to you earlier that with my education qualified users, I could have a mix of A3s and A5s. So I license some with Microsoft 365 A3, some with Microsoft 365 A5. What do I get with the student use benefit if I've mixed? If you do mix your education platform products, the student use benefit is based against the lower license. So if I have a mix of Microsoft 365 A3 and A5, my student use benefit would be A3. Obviously, if I'd done everyone with A5, my student use benefit would be A5, but if I've mixed, it's always done on the lesser quantity. So if Graphic Design Institute had put, I don't know, 1,000 on an A5 and the other 2,700 on A3, their student use benefit for all 3,700 EQUs would be worked out on an A3 option. So please do appreciate that when there's mixing, the student use benefit is always the lesser option. Okay, last couple of things, student use benefit and EES, and then we will move into CSP and focus on that for the rest of this session. I've just come back to Appendix H in the product terms document. As I say, it tells me what student use benefit rights I get and what agreements they're available through, so that's lovely. And then it tells me certain things down at the bottom. So it tells me things like licenses acquired through student use benefit are not eligible for software assurance, so I don't have any SA benefits. It tells me that for Windows 10, it's only Windows 10 E3 or A3, not the 5 option. It also tells me that I do have access to Windows Virtual Desktop. So that's a service from Azure when I can virtualize my desktop down onto client devices. I do have access to that, but I don't have any other Windows virtualization rights that I would get with a full license. Again, it's me coming back to the fact with student use benefits, I don't get access to everything. I also told you that I would show you where you can see what on-premises rights I have. And in the product terms document, Appendix A has this CAL equivalent licenses. And in here, I can see when I've licensed with a particular online service, what on-premises servers I'm allowed to access. Where there's a blue box, I can access that server. This is obviously only the top of the table. It's a very long table that wouldn't fit on all of one screen. So you need to look at the whole document in the product terms. And it has obviously the E plans and the A plans in there. So we can see where the academic licenses come into play, what on-prem rights they have. In the text at the bottom of the table, it says a user's license through student use benefits do not satisfy the license requirement for access to the products in this table. So this is where, I had that question. If I'm licensed with the student use benefit, have I got access to my on-premises servers? And I said, no, that's where it states that. So again, as I said to you, the product terms document is really useful because it will show you rights, but it will tell you if the student use benefit doesn't have those rights. But it's always near the bottom. So please don't stop reading something when you think you've read everything you want. Make sure you read the whole of that topic area because it's always one of the last lines saying this does not apply to the student use benefit, if that's the case. Right, so let me just check if there's any questions. So I've got some more questions around obviously OVSES. Am I able to offer any comments on the direction of OVSES? What we're going to see, I think, really is with OVSES, it's an agreement that hasn't really changed, obviously, for quite a few years. One of the things with OVSES is it doesn't have all the online services available in it. And in the academic world, we can see this move to licensing online services, much as we still have access to our on-premises rights. So I think what we'll find is that many OVSES customers, if they do want to license with online services, actually would potentially move to CSP. Would license their academic licenses through CSP. We've got a little scenario we'll see later where we kind of show that happening, and then they can access the online services that way. So it's a bit of a weird one. You know, if OVSES still fits a customer and fits their needs, then obviously it can exist and it can work as an agreement. But if they want more online services than are available in that agreement, I would say CSP would be the way to go. Ruth says, is on-premises licensing being phased out? No, Ruth, there's too many people that are obviously working with on-prem technology. So we're committing with something like EES, we are committing on the online services, but remember from what I was saying earlier, they have all the equivalent on-prem rights. So even though I've licensed in the cloud, I can still do everything on-prem. I have the extra online services available too, but I can still buy all my on-prem licenses as additional products in EES. And I have got things like Academic Open where I can, obviously buy on-prem software as well. So it's not being phased out, no. There's an encouragement to work with online services, yes. But no, they're not being completely phased out because we know that obviously certain customers are still most definitely in on-prem world. They can't necessarily move up to the cloud yet. Okay, so let's carry on and look at CSP and see the options that are available through the Cloud Solution Provider program. So we'll do that, and then we've got a couple of scenarios as well just to go through to finish off. So just coming back to this table here, when we look at the license availability through CSP, we can see that all the licenses that I've talked about so far, apart from the Office 365 Pro Plus device-based subscription license, they're all available through CSP. That device-based license not currently available through CSP. And CSP has an extra Microsoft 365 A1. And I'll come to that because that's targeting, again, a very specific, sort of set of licenses that we might need. So if you want to sell academic licenses through CSP, you do have to be an authorised education partner. I mean, you do have to be, obviously, to sell any of the academic licenses. And there is a process that obviously partners go through to become authorised education partners, where you have to, basically do a little bit of training so that you know how to work in academic world, have a little test just to check that, and then, accept the terms that say, yes, I'm allowed to sell academic licenses. When it comes to selling academic licenses through CSP, the customer must still be a qualified education customer. So they must still meet the terms of that qualified educational user definition document that I talked about right at the beginning of this session. This covers academic customers buying through any of the academic agreements. As long as that customer is eligible, then, as I say, you would be able to sell them the education licenses that will be available through CSP and would be visible to you as an academic partner on Partner Centre. With CSP, if you're familiar with it, you'll know the education licenses work in a very similar way. But the way it works with CSP is if I was an academic customer and I wanted to purchase Office 365 A3, for instance, you would set up a 12-month subscription for me. The subscription basically locks in the pricing that as a partner you buy from Microsoft. I would have agreed a price with you that you would sell me those licenses. You'd have a 12-month subscription, and during that 12-month period, you can adjust the quantity of licenses on an as-need basis. So with EES, I was telling you that you can increase your license count whenever you want, but you can only decrease on anniversary. With CSP, we have the real flexibility to change the license count up or down on an as-need basis. So great if I'm employing staff or someone leaves or whatever, I can just adjust the license count as needed. Payment upfront monthly is the default. You can actually pay annually as well with CSP, but because the license count might change frequently, it might be that you want to go for monthly payment. And there are no minimums because, with EES, again, I had to hit that 1000 EQUs. So obviously, if I'm a school, a primary school or something like that, I'm not going to hit 1000 EQUs. So I have no minimums with CSP, which is great. I could license one user if I needed to, and no commitment to cover all users. So again, if I don't want to cover everyone, I don't have to with CSP. So I can license all of those online services. There'll be a monthly cost, obviously, per user for the online services that they're working with. And I will get some special use rights, but they're not as full in CSP as they would be in EES. So if I've licensed through CSP Office 365 A3 or A5, I absolutely have the rights to access on-premises servers. So if I've got on-premises Exchange, SharePoint, Skype for Business servers, I can still access them with my licenses purchased through CSP. So I have those on-prem rights because, as I've said to you already, we know that customers are still running a lot of on-prem technology. The same if I've licensed EMS, E3 or E5 through CSP. Again, I have the on-prem rights back to Windows Server, back to System Center. If I license with Microsoft 365 A3 or A5 through CSP, I don't get all the rights that I would have done through EES. I get the rights that Office 365 gives me. I get the rights that EMS gives me. I don't get the rights to install extra copies of Exchange, SharePoint and Skype for Business, free of charge. I don't get the rights to downgrade Windows or Office to an earlier version because, I'm licensing with online services here. I don't have those rights within CSP. So as I say, the usage rights are, slightly different through CSP compared to EES. I do, however, get student use benefit, but I do have to have enterprise coverage. I have to have licensed all faculty and staff for the qualifying products to be able to have the student use benefit. So I have just said to you that CSP doesn't require enterprise-wide commitment, and it doesn't. You could license some of your staff in CSP if you wanted to. You don't have to cover everyone. However, if you want to take advantage of the student use benefit through CSP, you have to have licensed all faculty and staff. So that is a really important bit. And again, the product terms would clarify that. You'll also see certain things like Minecraft Education Edition as a standalone product doesn't qualify for the student use benefit. But if you have gone for Microsoft 365, A3 or A5, you do get Minecraft Education Edition as a student use benefit. So again, I would refer you back to this table. This table being the up-to-date, it's the product terms is updated monthly. If the student use benefit is updated, it comes into this document and it would show you what rights you have inside of there. So CSP is really very straightforward because you would just license, the particular online service that the customer wants with the quantity of licenses they need. However, we do have an extra option in CSP, which is this Microsoft 365 A1 option. Now, I've talked about Microsoft 365 A3 and A5, and we know that's a user-based license, so there's a monthly cost per user, and they've got all the features, obviously, that we talked about earlier. We know there's a free Office 365 A1 license. So where does Microsoft 365 A1 come into play? Well, this is a device-based license. So we're licensing it, as I say, per device, not per user. And it's Microsoft 365. So it consists of the free Office 365 A1. So that's really online access to the Office suite and access to Exchange, SharePoint, Teams Online, that side of things. It has a Windows 10 Pro upgrade, so I can get my machines up onto Windows 10, and it has Intune for Education. Intune is there to manage all of our devices, so it is, say, mobile device management, and Intune for Education has a special education interface to it to make it obviously easier to manage your academic devices. This is a great license. Take a school that has lots of devices inside of it that they could have, for starters, an older version of Windows on them that we want to upgrade up onto Windows 10. We want management tools, and we want, as I say, our students and our faculty to be able to use Office 365 A1 on those devices. We could license these with Microsoft 365 A1. There are certain rules. It is only available through CSP. You assign the license to a device, and that license is tied to the device. So it can't be reassigned anywhere else unless the device fails and suffers permanent hardware failure and is replaced by a manufacturer deemed equivalent device. I'll show you the proper wording for that in a moment. So if the device fails and is replaced with effectively the same device, you are allowed to transfer the license. You're not otherwise. The license is valid for the lifetime of the device, which is deemed to be 6 years from date of purchase, and it costs $30. So it's a one-off upfront payment of $30. There's no special faculty or student pricing. There's no student use benefit associated with it. You can't cancel it in that you've paid up front. So you can't change your mind partway through that 6 years life. Yeah, you paid your $30 and that's done. But what that has done for that device is meant you can upgrade it up onto Windows 10 Pro, and you have got your Intune for education to manage those devices. And you've got the rights to the free Office 365 A1. Now, that is free, so you've got to imagine that really your $30 is paying for Windows 10 and Intune. You've bought it per device. So let's say I had 20 devices, but I have 50 students who work on those devices. All 50 of them would need Office 365 A1, even though I've only bought 20 Microsoft 365 A1 licenses. And that would be fine. When you place the order in Partner Center, and these are slightly old screenshots, so the screenshots might have changed a little bit, but you would place an order for Microsoft 365 A1. My example is 100 devices that I've licensed here on this particular screenshot. But can you see then that I can add in, as the order is placed, any quantity that I need of the free Office 365 A1 for faculty and for students? So if I had 100 devices and 300 students that shared those devices, I could order 100 Microsoft 365 A1s and pay $30 each for those. And I could say, actually, though, for my students, I need 300 free Office 365 A1s for them to do the work they need. That would be absolutely fine. But it is a great way in schools for licensing, as I say, those devices that we're working with. And the product terms document, again, is the place that details the rules. So it details the fact that the term of the license is 6 years from date of order. So, that's obviously a key thing. It tells me that the license can't be cancelled and can only be reassigned to that new device of the same model or equivalent upon permanent hardware failure. It tells me that it has an upgrade to Windows 10 Pro. So as I say, for those devices licensed with Windows 7, which goes to end of support on the 14th of January next year, so what, 5 weeks away ish, really soon. Actually, this is a very cost-effective way at $30 to get those devices from Windows 7 up to Windows 10, obviously, if they're capable of doing that. So a great license really for schools to go ahead and, license those devices that sit in the classrooms. Okay, so that was all the key things I wanted to talk about with CSP. So let's have a quick look. Oh, Alex, you could be right on that one. Apologies if that's the case. Yeah. I will follow through on that link, but thank you for that. Okay, last bit then for the last 10 minutes of the session, I just want to talk through is just this licensing guidance side of things. So what I have got here is, I know I focused on CSP and EES today, really just because of time. There's not time in this sort of hour and a half to go through everything. But we have got this table here that does compare the different education licensing options. So looking at CSP, EES, and obviously OVSES that we haven't talked about, but again, picking out some of the main features there. They're not the easiest slides to kind of present as such. I really just wanted to have you to have access to this. So again, if you look at the recording at a later stage, take a screenshot of this, you have got this slide that does compare the different agreements. What I want to do is just spend the next few minutes just talking through a couple of scenarios that we have, just to highlight some of the key things that I've been sort of discussing. So we've got a scenario here for a large customer coming to the end of their existing Enrolment for Education solutions. They have been licensed on FTE count, they had 1,200 of them. They'd licensed on premises with the Education Desktop, and they've got a number of concessions that they have negotiated with Microsoft as part of their EES. They want to evaluate moving to the cloud. So over the next 2 years, so they're possibly heading to the cloud, but they want to carry on doing what they've always done, and they want to carry on with the fact that they've negotiated some rights with Microsoft. So when you look at this particular customer, you would recommend that they carry on with their Enrolment for Education solutions, but that they would move to Microsoft 365 A3, because that is the equivalent to the Education Desktop with Enterprise CAL. It gives equivalent and enhanced rights. So in other words, I still have the rights to all of my on-premises software that I would have had with my Education Desktop with eCal, but I've also got the online services as well. So I can start evaluating them, and I can choose at my own pace to actually technically move all of those users up into the cloud. And then I can get attractive pricing through EES, because there's different price levels based on how many EQUs you're licensing. So I can obviously have access to that. And if Microsoft are happy, I can retain my existing concessions. So again, with the Enrolment for Education solutions, there is the ability to negotiate concessions if required. So the fact that I have the on-prem rights, even though I'm having to license in the cloud with EES, obviously is a key sort of feature. What about our next scenario? So this particular customer, again, an expiring EES, it's a slightly smaller one, 1,500 FTEs. Again, they've licensed Education Desktop with eCal. They've got some important on-premises server solutions, and they have got students licensed for Office 365 Pro Plus via the student use benefit. Again, they want to evaluate moving to the cloud over the next 18 months, but they still need everyone to have access to the on-prem environments. So in this case, again, we know licensing in the cloud with Microsoft 365 A3 gives them the rights to move to the cloud at their own pace. They can take advantage of student use benefit if they want to, but as I've already mentioned, all the on-prem server software is still available as additional products. So if they need to buy extra licenses, they can do that. And we know that for the education qualified users that have been licensed with Microsoft 365 A3 or A5, that they have rights to the on-prem service, plus the ability to install extra copies of Exchange, SharePoint and Skype for Business as well. And then my last scenario, let's take a smaller customer. They have an expiring OVSES, 350 FTEs inside of there. They want to go up to the cloud in short term, and they want a more flexible licensing solution than they did have with their 3-year OVSES. So here we would recommend CSP. That is really the agreement that we would ideally recommend your OVS-ES customers move into if they're licensing in the cloud. CSP would be the place to go. Again, we'd be looking at potentially Microsoft 365 A3. I think we'd probably have more discussion as to what they wanted to be licensed with. But then they have got that full cloud solution, but they haven't had to make a commitment. So they can buy that just for the people that need to have access to that. They can add and remove license count on a monthly basis, if they want to. But if they still need to buy on-prem software, then not currently available through CSP, so they wouldn't have access to the on-prem software apart from Windows Server and SQL. All the rest of it isn't available yet through CSP, so they would need to go out to another agreement if they did want to buy on-prem software. And in this case, obviously that would be potentially Academic Open, and they could buy the on-prem licenses if they had any that they needed through that. So my last slide, just before I check to see if any of you have got any other questions for me, is just a little flow chart just to help you kind of predict what agreement we would be licensing with. So that first question in the blue box is, is there any need for support for consortia or amendments and concessions from Microsoft? If that's the case, EES is the agreement, obviously, if the customer hits the minimums, because that's the agreement where you can negotiate with Microsoft. Assuming that's not the case, we then have to say, right, do you want to cover all of your education qualified users with a particular license? If you don't want enterprise-wide commitment, the answer is no, you'd go to CSP, because we know you can license in whatever quantity you want. If you're happy to cover everyone, then say, well, do you need flexibility of being able to change license count whenever you need, rather than only being able to reduce on anniversary? If you want flexibility, CSP will give you that. If you don't need to be really sort of agile with your license count, okay, we could still be on EES. Do we need to access existing on-prem solutions? No. Fine, CSP. And we obviously had some on-prem access with CSP, but we didn't have as much as we would have had with EES. If we do need obviously more on-prem rights, do we need to license more or less than 1,000 users? If it's less, OVSES or CSP, either would do. If you're licensing more than 1,000, are you? Oh, sorry, no, that was yes. God, I'm getting my brain tied up in knots with double negatives. If you do need to license more than 1,000, are you prepared to commit to a 1-year or a 3-year fixed term? Again, if the answer is no, you would go CSP. If the answer is yes, then probably EES at that point if you're licensing over 1,000, but OVSES would still be eligible at that point. So I quite like that little chart just to make me think of the key things and some of those key differences between EES and CSP. As I say, obviously you may or may not find that useful. Right, that has brought me to the end, and timing wise as well as slide wise. I don't see any other questions. If you do have any other questions for me, obviously do quite happily type them in now. I think Maddie's put some information in. Excellent. Maddie's also in the announcements put in a link, so I know, I think it was Chris earlier, you were wanting to send a question through. So if you just send that through to the email address that Maddie has put an announcement out for, then we will be able to follow up, obviously, on your question that you've got afterwards. So do feel free to use that link. But I will wrap up the session. I do hope it has been a useful session for you, just going through the academic side of things. As I say, you can access the recording again if you want to after the training. But I don't see any other questions. Oh, hang on a minute. Okay, and a comment. So a problem currently is it still seems to be more cost effective to renew under OVS rather than Microsoft 365 A3 and then buy the perpetual Windows Server licenses they need. I mean, it's tricky. I suppose it really comes to what technology users need to work with as well. OVSES is obviously still there as an agreement that we can buy through. So I think if you're more on-prem based and OVSES is an agreement that fits your needs, that may well be the way to go. But obviously online services, it is better supported in something like CSP. You have got that bigger range, but a lot of it would come down to what the customer actually needs to work with. So yes, I agree, it can be a tricky one sometimes in which is the best agreement to go through. I suppose with OVSES as well, it's 3 years you're tied in for at that point. So it's that maybe trying to look further into the future as to where someone's going as well. But yes, discussions do often need to be had to make sure the best agreement has been identified. Okay, well, anyway, I am going to wrap up because we have hit end of time. So I do hope it has been a very useful session for you. So have a lovely rest of your day, and hopefully I'll get to talk to you again very soon. But goodbye, you may disconnect now.